Foreign Relations Chairman Bob Menendez, live from Jerusalem, where he's been meeting with Israeli leaders, who, of course, are very concerned about what's happening in the region. Senator, I think there is some satellite delay. We'll deal with that. But tell me your perspective now that John McCain has gone into Syria very dramatically to meet with General Idris and the rebel front.
Well, Andrea, Senator McCain has been very vocal about his views on Syria, and going into Syria is not unlike when he went into Libya at the time. So, I think Senator McCain, who I was with in Jordan before coming to Israel, has made it very clear he believes that we have to change the dynamics in Syria in order to both stop the bloodshed and see if we can achieve a result that, we would want to see.
Now, you were part of, you sponsored legislation last week in committee, hasn't reached the floor yet, but where do you stand on what the administration is not doing regarding the rebels? Your legislation would permit some arms to go to the rebels.
Well, our legislation that passed in a strong bipartisan vote of 15-3 in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is basically empowering the president, should he make the decision, to armed, vetted elements of the Syrian opposition, the type of opposition that we believe share our values, the type of opposition that would be, if they came to power, inclusive of all of Syrian society, in an effort to try to change the circumstances in Syria. We have enormous bloodshed, 80,000 lives lost, 1.5 million Syrian refugees spread all over the region, an incredible number that I visited in the Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, nearly 500,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan as a whole, tremendous challenge to Jordan, spill over into Iraq, spill over into Lebanon. The bottom line is, if Assad can continue to have a monopoly on air power and artillery, then he doesn't think that he's going to lose this war, and he thinks that he can win a war of attrition. So we have to do something to change the dynamics so that Assad has a recalculation, or that his patrons have a recalculation. And so our legislation is to give the president the wherewithal, should he decide to use it, to arm vetted elements of the Syrian opposition, and also to increase the humanitarian assistance to the region, and to look at how we might very well sanction entities that are providing arms and or petroleum to the Assad regime.
There is a perception, though, and John McCain and others have certainly voiced this, and a perception by members of the rebel groups, that what the Secretary of State is doing, admirable as it may be, to find a diplomatic solution, is slow-walking it, is giving the president some cover, diplomatic cover, for not doing anything and for taking more time, just as the regime gets more and more propped up by Hezbollah and gets rearmed by the Russians, and is really making sure that Assad is not going to be ousted.
Well, I think the administration's been very clear that Assad must go. Now, I give credit to Secretary Kerry for trying to see if there can be a negotiated solution, if there can be a breakthrough. I have a problem as I see the Russian counterparts in that effort sending advanced missiles into Syria. It seems to me they're doubling down on Assad. And so that's why I think that a parallel track has to be led, so that the president can have the wherewithal to have other options should the negotiated efforts that the Secretary is trying to pursue not ultimately give itself the success that he hopes for. And so, I believe that our effort is an effort that had a strong bipartisan vote, I think has good sentiment inside of the Congress, and hopefully, we won't need it, but I think we need to have that parallel track at the same time in order to send a clear message to Assad, and send a message to his patrons, and to empower the president should he decide to use that option.
And finally, quickly, I know you're far from home doing your job as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, but do you think the federal government has done enough, and the insurance companies as well, to make it clear to residents of New Jersey what they need to do to rebuild? Because many of them are in a holding pattern.
Well, I, certainly have a problem with some of the insurance companies trying to avoid their responsibility to homeowners who have paid their premiums. I think we've done a lot on behalf of the federal government's efforts with the state of New Jersey, but there's still a lot more to do. There are still people who are outside of their homes. There are still people who are waiting to see the new flood maps and how that'll affect them. And the one thing that is really problematic that we had hoped to have a vote on, and the Republicans unfortunately stopped us, is the potentially skyrocketing premiums for flood insurance, which would just create a man-made disaster for so many of these homeowners who already faced, Sandy, then they faced the efforts of recovery, then they're facing, new building codes, and now to get skyrocketing premiums on flood insurance, which they critically need for their mortgages and the resale value of their property, is just a triple whammy, and it's something that we need to deal with.
Senator Bob Menendez, thank you very much from Jerusalem. Safe travels. Thanks for joining us.